Let's talk about a seismic shift happening in global politics.
Right.
We're seeing a world where some of the traditional alliances, they seem to be fraying, right?
Yeah.
And in their place, you get these audacious new partnerships emerging. It's completely redrawing the map of international power. We're witnessing, I think, a really dramatic realignment. You've got two nations, often perceived as isolated, now forging this bond. And many analysts are actually calling it an axis of upheaval.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to look at the headlines from the past few months, really. Think back to this past June. Russian President Vladimir Putin landed in Pyongyang. That was his first visit in 24 years, by the way. And he was there to ink what they described as a comprehensive strategic partnership with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, and this wasn't just, a photo op or a ceremonial handshake. The agreement included explicit mutual defense commitments.
A pledge to come to each other's aid if attacked. That's serious.
Extremely serious.
And then, just this October, we saw reports confirming North Korea dispatched 1,500 special forces, apparently the vanguard of maybe 12,000 troops, to aid Russia in Ukraine.
Which is unprecedented. I mean, this marks the first large-scale deployment of North Korean ground forces overseas in history, certainly since the Korean War. And what's particularly striking, looking through the sources we have, is just the sheer velocity, how fast this partnership has accelerated.
Right.
It's really transformed from what looked like maybe a transactional, opportunistic exchange into something that feels much more like a deeply strategic, long-term alignment.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about two countries finding some common ground. It feels like a direct and, frankly, potent challenge to the existing global order.
How so?
Well, consider this. Back in early 2024, Moscow actually used its veto power in the UN Security Council. They blocked the renewal of the panel of experts, the ones monitoring North Korean sanctions.
Wow, okay.
That's essentially giving Pyongyang a diplomatic green light, isn't it, to expand its weapons programs. It undermines years of international effort.
So today, that's exactly what we're doing. Taking a deep dive into this burgeoning, pretty complex alliance between Russia and North Korea. Our sources for this include some detailed analyses from places like the Heritage Foundation, the American Conservative, and also RAND. And they generally describe this partnership as a new global challenge, one rooted in a shared anti-Western ideology. So our mission today is to try and unpack the intricate motivations driving this alignment, understand its military and strategic implications, and explore what it genuinely means for global stability and, maybe most importantly, for you, our listener.
And I think when we connect these dots, it becomes pretty clear this isn't just a bilateral thing. It seems to be a core component of what some analysts are now calling a new authoritarian world order, which, raises a really critical question for all of us. What are the consequences? What happens when major global powers actively work to dismantle rather than uphold the international rules-based system, the system that's, for better or worse, governed global interactions for decades?
You mentioned this isn't just temporary. Based on the sources, what are the clearest signs that this partnership is a profound long-term challenge, a challenge to that system that's been in place since the Cold War ended?
Yeah, the analyses are actually strikingly consistent on this. What really stands out is how explicitly these nations seem to be coordinating, not just their actions, but their ideological messaging, too.
Yeah.
The American conservative piece, for instance, calls it an axis of upheaval. It positions Russia and North Korea alongside China and Iran, maybe in a looser, more agile, but potentially far more dangerous authoritarian bloc.
So not just isolated actors.
Exactly. It suggests a deliberate, coordinated effort to present authoritarian governance as, well, a legitimate alternative to liberal democracy. They seem to be actively trying to normalize repression, using disinformation campaigns to erode Western public trust. It feels like a fundamental clash of worldviews.
And it's not just talk, is it? We're seeing very concrete actions, especially around those international sanctions against North Korea. Russia, a permanent UN Security Council member, seems to have gone from maybe quietly looking the other way to openly shielding Pyongyang on the global stage.
Yeah.
How big a deal was that move in early 2024 when Moscow vetoed the renewal of that UN monitoring panel?
Oh, that veto was huge. A diplomatic earthquake, really. You can't overstate it. For a permanent member of the Security Council to actively work to dismantle the very mechanisms designed to enforce international law, especially on nuclear proliferation, it sends a very clear message.
Right.
It essentially declares open season on those sanctions, doesn't it? It removes a key layer of international oversight and accountability. And this seems to be part of a broader strategy, identified in the sources, to create what they call sanctions-proof trade. and to directly oppose what both nations are calling Western hegemony, this idea of controlling global affairs.
So it hits the credibility of the UN itself.
Absolutely. It undermines the system and, it emboldens other states that might want to evade sanctions too.
Okay, so if we dig a bit deeper, beneath these actions, what do the sources say about the core beliefs driving this alliance? How does this anti-Westernism actually manifest as an ideology for them?
Well, at its heart, the alliance seems fueled by this shared anti-Westernism, a deep-seated conviction that they are, quote, engaged in a spiritual and political conflict with the West.
Spiritual and political. Interesting phrasing.
Isn't it? The analyses suggest both regimes see Western influence, particularly its emphasis on individual liberties, democratic values, the market economy, as fundamentally corrosive.
Corrosive how?
They argue it erodes the moral fabric of their more conservative societies, threatening state control and, traditional social structures. So their ambition seems to be replacing the U.S.-led rules-based international system with a multipolar world order.
Okay, multipolar. We hear that term a lot.
Right. And in their vision, it's one where national sovereignty is prioritized above everything else. Often that comes at the expense of concepts like universal human rights or democratic principles.
That's a pretty profound ideological divide. What would a world actually look like in practice based on this multipolar order where national sovereignty trumps universal rights, according to these sources?
Well, it would be a world, as they seem to envision it, where states like Russia and North Korea operate with far fewer international constraints, where their internal affairs are essentially beyond external critique or judgment.
Right. Hands off.
Exactly. And where their strategic ambitions aren't hindered by what they call Western interference. For them, the existing international order is exploitative and oppressive. That's the language they use. And they're actively working to build an alternative framework where different values prevail, values emphasizing state power, traditional hierarchies, national interest over individual freedoms. It's a fundamentally different vision for how the world should work.
Okay, let's pivot now to the immediate tangible impact. The military side of this partnership. It's already causing serious ripples, isn't it? Both in the Indo-Pacific and, of course, in Europe. North Korea has become this vital weapons supplier for Russia's war in Ukraine, sending huge amounts of artillery shells, ballistic missiles. Can you give us a clearer picture of the scale of that support?
Absolutely. And the scale is, frankly, immense.
Right.
And unprecedented for North Korea. The sources detail how North Korea has supplied millions of artillery shells and dozens of short-range ballistic missiles to Russia.
Millions.
Yeah, one estimate mentions something like 8 million artillery shells and over 10,000 containers of munitions shipped just between September 2023 and February 2024.
Wow.
These are desperately needed supplies, and they're directly sustaining Russia's war effort at its current intensity. Without this input, Russia's capability would likely be significantly hampered.
And beyond just the munitions, there's also that unprecedented deployment of North Korean troops we mentioned earlier, right?
Indeed. And that's a significant and I think quite alarming escalation. Pyongyang dispatching thousands of troops to fight alongside Russian forces. The reports indicate 1,500 special forces leading the way, with potentially up to 12,000 expected eventually.
And that's a huge shift.
Monumental.
Okay.
It's the first time North Korea has deployed large-scale ground forces overseas for combat since the Korean War. And for these troops, you have to think it's an opportunity to gain modern combat experience.
Which they can then bring back.
Exactly. Bring back and apply to North Korea's own military doctrine, training, potentially making their own forces more formidable down the line.
But maybe the most impactful piece, certainly recently, was that June 2024 signing. The comprehensive strategic partnership, including that mutual defense clause. Now, it's framed as defensive, but does this pact genuinely raise the risk that Kim might feel emboldened? Feel like he has Russian backing to make maybe even more dangerous moves against South Korea or its allies?
It absolutely does. That's the consensus in the analyses we looked at. That mutual defense clause obligating each nation to provide military and other assistance if the other is attacked, it's a game changer.
How so?
It immediately ratchets up tensions on the Korean peninsula. Pyongyang could easily interpret this as sort of blank check, believing Russia's support provides a shield against severe retaliation if they, provoke something.
And we've already seen South Korea react, haven't we?
We have. They started considering abandoning their long-standing policy of not providing lethal aid directly to Ukraine, which creates this dangerous cycle, this potential escalation.
Right, because Putin warned against that.
He did. He warned that such a move would be a very big mistake and could lead to Russia providing even more advanced military tech to North Korea. So you get this volatile feedback loop. And it's also, you could argue, a calculated strategic move by Putin
to stretch U.S. resources.
Exactly. Stretch U.S. resources and attention between Europe and the Indo-Pacific, forcing difficult choices for American policymakers.
Okay, that leads us right into what many are calling the most alarming long-term consequence. The potential for Russia to, quote, supercharge North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. How could this really alter the regional security dynamic? What specific technologies are we most concerned about here?
This really is the critical long-term worry, I think. In exchange for those crucial munitions, Russia isn't just offering food, fuel, maybe hard currency. The biggest concern is advanced military technology transfer. And what's fascinating, or perhaps terrifying, are the specific areas where Russia has decades of expertise that North Korea lacks.
Like what?
Like providing the technical know-how for warhead miniaturization.
Making the nukes small enough to fit on missiles?
Precisely. The ability to make nuclear warheads small enough to fit onto their growing arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles, that capability is often described as the crown jewel that Pyongyang has desperately sought for years.
And what about their non-nuclear missiles, their conventional ones? Could Russian tech flow there too?
Absolutely. The sources definitely point to that possibility. Think about the development of more advanced, maneuverable cruise missiles like their Hwasal family. With Russian help, these could become faster, more accurate, much better at evading U.S. and South Korean missile defenses.
So it's harder to stop.
Much harder. Imagine if technology from Russia's sophisticated Kaliber cruise missiles, or perhaps their land-based SSC-8 cruise missile system, were transferred. That would significantly complicate any defensive planning and increase the threat dramatically.
And looking longer range, their ballistic missile programs, ICBMs.
Yeah, this raises a really important question about their intercontinental ballistic missile program, their ICBMs, and also their submarine-launched ballistic missiles, the SLBMs. Russian assistance could potentially help North Korea build larger ICBMs capable of carrying multiple warheads.
MIRVs.
MIRVs, exactly. Multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. That would just dramatically increase their destructive potential and make them incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to fully defend against.
And submarines add another layer.
Right. Russia could enhance North Korea's second strike capability from submarines, making their nuclear deterrent much more survivable. And we've already seen, haven't we, a really rapid pace and increasing sophistication in North Korean missile tests recently.
We have.
Some analysts are already suggesting that could be an early sign that this Russian technical help is starting to filter through.
Wow. Okay, this sounds like it would completely shift the deterrence dynamic in the region. How would a North Korea armed with those kinds of advanced capabilities look at regional security differently?
It would fundamentally alter the balance, no question. A North Korea with those advanced capabilities would undoubtedly feel far more confident, maybe far more aggressive. Instead of a strategy focused on deterring through denial, where you hope missile defenses can intercept threats, we'd increasingly be facing deterrence by punishment.
Meaning the threat of massive retaliation after an attack lands.
Exactly. And that shift makes any crisis far more volatile, far more prone to rapid escalation. The margin for error just shrinks dramatically. The region's already tense. This would make it even more unpredictable.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean for us, for you listening? We've unpacked how this Russia-North Korea partnership seems to have transformed into a really strategic long-term alliance. It seems driven by a shared anti-Western ideology, this desire for a multipolar world order. We see North Korea bolstering Russia's war effort with millions of shells, even troops, and in return, Russia is potentially supercharging Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs.
Yeah.
We're talking advanced tech transfers, like warhead miniaturization, maybe even MIRVs.
Yeah, and this isn't just distant geopolitics playing out somewhere else. It has direct implications potentially for global stability, maybe even for your security and economic future down the line. This alliance is actively working to undermine international institutions, the sanctions regimes. It's increasing regional instability, creating new, very complex challenges for the U.S. and its allies. A more emboldened North Korea, feeling backed by Russia, could lead to more dangerous provocations on the Korean peninsula. That could force nations like South Korea and Japan to rethink their own defense policies, potentially escalating conflicts in ways we can't fully predict. And those ripples could easily affect global supply chains, security alliances, everything.
So here's where the deeper questions really start to emerge, I think. As this axis of upheaval, as some call it, continues to solidify, as it actively pushes for this multipolar world order, it really forces us to ask, what happens to concepts like universal human rights and democratic values when national sovereignty is prioritized above all else by these powerful blocs? And maybe just as importantly, what role will our traditional alliances, the ones often forged on shared values, play in a world that's being actively reshaped by this powerful new, ideologically driven partnership? Something to think about.